Game over. Get over here.
No Mortal Kombat people? Okay.
Scorpion wins.
All right. If you can hear my voice, clap once. If you can hear my voice, clap twice. Actually, if I can get someone to turn up my mic, that would be helpful. There are some people who look like they're straining, so I don't know who that person might be to turn up my microphone.
Because I don't want to do this, because then the people who need to read my lips can't read my lips. So if we can have somebody turn up my microphone, that'd be great. And nobody's moving. Okay. Yeah, there's nobody in the booth. It's like 7-Eleven. Nobody's home. Have you ever noticed that? Okay, cool. Thank you. So as you were walking around the room, first of all, was there anyone that was not able to find somebody to write on their paper? Was there somebody that has a totally blank paper as they were going around? Okay, cool. So everybody was at least able to find one person to sign on the paper. That's a safe assumption? For those people who were participating, right? Okay, cool. So as you were going around the room, were there things you saw on other people's papers and you were like, why didn't I think of that? I should have wrote that down, right? So what was something that someone saw on someone else's paper and they were like, I should have wrote that down? Yes. Education, you saw that. Yes. Freedom, you saw that. Yes. Time. There was someone in the middle here that had their hand up. Fun. Health, right? So it was obvious that there were other things that people had on their paper, and you were like, I value that too. I should have wrote that down. Now, were there also things that were more difficult to find someone to sign on, or you actually didn't find anyone to sign on it? Was there anything like that? Yes. Security. Please raise your hand if you value security. Having security, financial, physical, whatever, however you want to say security, raise your hand if you also value that. So these are lots of people who could have signed for you, right? All right? Cool. Someone else. What was something that was difficult? Yes. Music. Please raise your hand if you value music, right? Even if you don't think modern day stuff is music. I don't understand the whole mumble rap thing. You know, no. I don't understand that. There was another hand right in here. Yes. Cultural appreciation. Please raise your hand if you value cultural appreciation, either yours or someone else's. All right, great. So you are a smart and beautiful group. What do you think is the punchline or the moral, the lesson of this particular activity? What do you think we were after by having you have this experience? To look at the things that we have in common. And what else? The things that we have that may be differences. So looking at our commonalities and our differences. So if you can write down on your paper somewhere a new definition of diversity, because people like to talk about diversity, but I want to say oftentimes it's not been effective, right? So here's a definition that I like to operate from. That diversity is the recognition and honoring of our commonalities and differences. That is the recognition and acknowledgement of our commonalities and our differences. Because if we don't operate with that and, we get the ors, right? And how many people have been to a diversity training before? Raise your hand if you've been to, okay? You are the people I have to fix. Because oftentimes, sitting in these kind of conversations, it's been an either or, right versus wrong, good versus evil, God versus the devil, right? But I want to say that life is full of these ands. And so as we think about the world that we live in, I want us to move towards thinking about these ands. And we'll talk about why in just a second, all right? So, the other part is, if we don't recognize the and, then we get tripped up by obstacle illusions.
Obstacle illusions. Artificial barriers to authentic human relationships. If we don't have that if we don't see our commonalities and our differences, we might get confused about who is in front of us. As an example, I was not born black. I know some of you are like, is it a reverse Michael Jackson thing? Like, what's going on? No, I'm okay. I'm okay. Right? So what I didn't tell you about my parents is that they got married when they were sophomores in college. And that is probably not the best decision, but love has a way, right? And so my parents got married the sophomore year in college. They got married in June, and so there's a family secret, right? So my dad was a pastor. He preached no sex before marriage. And that was he stood by that, no sex before marriage. And but we never talk about the fact that they got married in June and I was born in October. Well, we just don't talk about that, right? But when I was born, it was very interesting. I was born in the 70s, and they had some very archaic ways of interacting with the world in the 70s, right? So I'm born, they give me to the doctor turns me upside down, and he slaps me. And what do you think I do? No, I slap him back. That's an old Richard Pryor joke, and probably the only one I can tell, right? So that's not my joke. That's not my joke. But the doctor hands me to the nurse, and the nurse goes through her checklist, and she gets to the part of the checklist that changes my life forever. And it's the part of the checklist that denotes my race. And in 1970 in Dayton, Ohio, they had 3 categories that they were looking at: black, white, and other. And so the nurse looked at my parents, and she looked at me, and she looked at her checklist, and she looked at me, and she looked at my parents, and she looked at her checklist, and she made a decision. And what decision do you think she made? Black. There must be some colorblind people in here. I don't see color. No, she chose black. But here's the thing that I think is most interesting about that, right? What I think is most interesting is, what was I before she made her distinction? I was born human, but America made me black. If I was born in Haiti, I would have another distinction. If I was born in China, I have another distinction. If I was born in Spain or Cuba or Argentina, I have a totally different distinction. But because I was born here, America made me black. And so what oftentimes happens is we make these assumptions of things that are, when in fact they may not be. They may not be. And so I question, what were you when you were born? And then what did people tell you you were? What did people tell you you were? It's funny, I don't know if anybody know where St. Francis is? All right, so, oh yes, all right. Yeah, this isn't like one of those late night shows where you call out a city and people are like, woo! You know, there's just like not enough people from St. Francis to call that, right? So I'm in St. Francis, right? And it's not a very diverse kind of place. It's rural Minnesota. It just is, right? I mean, no fault, no whatever. But I'm in McDonald's, right? So I have an appointment to do this boys group, and I'm in McDonald's, and this white kid is getting off his shift at McDonald's. And so he immediately turns his hat to the side and pulls down his McDonald's issued uniform pants so that they sag, right? And I'm the only black guy in the thing, and he comes up to me and he's like, yo, what's up, man? And I'm sitting here, now this is how I dress. Like, I go fishing, like this is how I camp. This is me, right? Do I look like a yo, what's up, dude? Right? So he comes over to me, and I'm like, hey, how are you? He was like, yo, dude, you check out that Tech 9? Now, I don't know what he's talking about. I have no idea what he's talking about. But I have context clues, right? So he's giving me the thing. So I'm like, it must be an urban thing. He must be talking about some music stuff. I don't listen to it. I said, no, man, I don't listen to that. I said, I'm more into the classics. And he was like, oh, for real? I was like, yeah. Have you ever heard of a group called Beastie Boys? And he was like, no, I got to check that out, right? And so at first I was annoyed. Right? Because here's this kid, this white kid from St. Francis, acting what? Some people might say black or urban, right? But what was he trying to do? He was trying to build a relationship. He wasn't skillful at doing it, but he was trying to connect. He was trying to build a relationship. And had I smashed that young man and said, what are you doing? You don't act like that. You're from St. Francis. What would that have done for him? I probably would have crushed him. And he probably would not have tried to build a relationship with anybody else who he thought that looked like me. Right? And so sometimes we got to ask ourselves, is it better to be right or is it better to be effective? And we'll hear that question come up on a number of times. And I'm not saying you have to take disrespect. I'm not saying that. But I am asking you to think about, are there ways that you could build bridges with people who you don't think have things in common when in fact you do have things in common? We are more alike than we are different. And I would suggest that the differences that we think we see are these optical illusions. All right? So let's stick with the circle. And there's a larger circle there. So you have the 5 circles, you have a larger circle. And let's call this the circle of all human knowledge. Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Too much mega mind. All right. I have a 4-year-old and a 4-month-old, and that's the kind of stuff I'm stuck with, right? So, but let's call this the pie of all knowledge. The pie of all knowledge. What I want you to do is to cut yourself a piece of pie the size of what you know of everything there is to know. A piece of pie the size of what you know of everything there is to know. All science, all languages, all history, all religions, everything there is to know. Cut yourself a piece of pie. And some of you may say, it's too small, but humor me, all right? So just draw something, all right? So we'll call that piece of pie what we know. So what are some examples of things that you know for sure? You know these things. What do you know? What's that? What do you know? You know dentistry. Please raise your hand if you know dentistry. Not everybody's hands went up, and I'm nervous. I'm now nervous. I'm not nervous, right? So there are things that we certainly know, right? We know that for all intents and purposes, all things considered, tomorrow will come, right? Or we can be relatively assured that that will happen. We know that we know how to drive or clothe ourselves, or we know how to speak, right? So these are things that we know. What I want you to do now is to cut a second piece of pie, which is the size of what you know you don't know. All right? So this, for me, it would be, I don't know Mandarin Chinese. I don't know how to fly an airplane, and I now know that I should stop doing lobotomies. Okay, some people didn't get that joke. Okay. Right? So cut that second piece of pie, and I want you to resist the temptation to say, well, that's just the rest of the pie. Because there's a third piece that we will identify. All right? There's a third piece of pie we will identify. So we have what we know. We have what we know we don't know. And what are some examples of things we know we don't know? He says he knows he doesn't know his wife. There's so many places I could go with that joke, but I'm not touching it. Not touching it. All right? So other people. So we obviously don't know what other people's motivations are necessarily, but we'll talk about that too. We also don't know the future, because if you know the future, please give me the lottery numbers and we're out of here. Right? Yeah, so there are certainly things that we know we don't know. And what do you think is the last part of that pie? Things we need to know, or things we don't know, right? Or your blind spots. So if you could write the two words blind spots in that biggest piece of the pie, right? So our blind spots, our blind spots. So if we have what we know, we have what we know we don't know, and we have our blind spot. If we put all three of those together, we have something that I like to refer to as our paradigm. So please write the word paradigm next to that big circle. P-A-R-A-D-I-G-M. I used to say paradigm. I was hooked on phonics. It worked for me. Right? So paradigm. And oftentimes organizations and groups or individuals say they want to shift the paradigm. We need to move the paradigm. We need a paradigm shift. What are they talking about when they talk about this paradigm shift or changing the paradigm? What is a paradigm? It's a way of thinking. It could be a culture. It could be what?
Status quo.
It could be status quo. So I like to think about paradigm as simply the way you see the world, or a worldview, right? And the way you see the world will dictate what it is that you're able to see. How you see the world will dictate what you're able to see. So it's important that we challenge our own paradigm. So when I see a person, do I see their stereotype, or do I see an opportunity to see them? So the young man missed an opportunity to actually meet me because he saw my stereotype first and then later became interested in who I was, right? So let's go down to the bottom of that page. So paradigms are important. The way you see the world or your worldview is important. So at the bottom of that page, there is a diagram. And I want you to count the number of triangles in that diagram. And when you have a number, shout it out. 5, 8, 11, 6, 7, 0. All right, so let's back up just for a second, because I heard 8, 7, 9, I heard 0, 11, I heard 11. So let's define a triangle. What is a triangle? It is a three-sided, closed object, right? Right? So 3 sides. So as you look at that, with that definition in mind, how many triangles are there? There are no triangles. So how was it that many of us were able to see triangles when there are in fact no triangles? That's called Gestalt psychology. The recognition that the human mind will close forms. We will make sense of things that don't make sense. But nobody said that they were 3 Pac-Man. No triangles, but 3 Pac-Man. All right? So that's important for us to recognize. So making sure that we're cognitive as we interact with people in the world, to know what we're dealing with, know what we're talking about, right? It is important. Let's turn over to page 2. So there are some truths about human beings that we have to recognize, particularly as people are coming into our chairs, as we're interacting with other people, and these are some of the things that we have to recognize that are truisms, if you will, of human beings. One is that human beings can learn, change, and grow. We can learn, change, and grow. We are not confined to who we were. So, is a person racist? I don't know, because they don't have to always be racist, right? Am I the mistake that I've made? I would suggest that I am not that mistake, because I can change and I can grow. But if I don't change and I don't grow, it could be argued that I am that mistake, right? So human beings can learn, change, and grow. People do what they think works even when what? Even when it doesn't work, right? So people do what they think works even when it doesn't work. So my daughter, she's 4 years old. I made a mistake. I haven't always been the best parent. I don't know if there are other parents in here that can attest to that. I've had my good days, but this was one of my worst days. We're in the candy aisle. I'm frustrated. I've got a cart full of stuff. She's whining and complaining. I have a setup at the store. They set me up for failure at the store. We're in the checkout, and the kid is da-da-da-da. And I give the kid the thing the kid wants so she will stop. Right? And so I'm like, we got out of that. What's the problem? The next time we go to the store, it's the same situation, and she's confused about me. She's like, Dad, why are you changing? You were inconsistent before. Why do you want to be consistent now? Right? No, she didn't actually say that. That's her boss baby voice, you know. So she's acting up to get this thing, even though I'm not going to do that anymore, right? And so oftentimes when we see people, we have to recognize that their behavior is trying to get something, and they actually think that behavior will get that. I don't know if you've ever had an irate person come and talk to you, but they're irate because being irate worked before. And when you kill them with kindness, they do not know what to do with that stuff because they're used to somebody responding to them with that same level. Right? I'll never forget in middle school, they oftentimes talk about conflict de-escalation. Bring the conflict down. Right? Have you ever tried that with a middle schooler? Right? So I got Ramon, right? So Ramon is having a day. Something happened, either on the bus or at home or whatever. Ramon comes into the classroom and you know, he's got attitude, lots of attitude. And I'm like, Ramon, bring it down. Talk kindly. Soft eyes, Ramon. And what do you think Ramon says? F you! Ah! Right? Because I just set him off. I set him off because I didn't understand where he was coming from. I didn't recognize what he was going through. And so sometimes we don't recognize the battles that people fight before they get to us. Right? So there's that. And then all human behavior is goal-directed. And we'll talk about that in just a second. And then lastly, attitude is a reaction to a goal. Attitude is a reaction to a goal. And what have we been taught about an attitude? What have people said? What have adults around us or people around us told us about attitudes? Don't have one, right? That they're bad or negative or some kind of emotional response to something, right? I want to tell you that it's a little bit more than that. It is that, but it's more than that. Right? And I didn't learn that until I was about 17. So my parents they were trying to raise me differently, my brothers and sisters and I differently than how they were raised, right? And so they used lots of psychology with us. So we stood in corners with dictionaries. I don't know if anybody had parents who did that, right? Stand in the corner holding a dictionary or whatever. But when all that stuff didn't work, they went back to what they knew, which was yelling and screaming. And so my mother we would get her so razzled and so unwound that she would just say goofy things like, boy, you better fix your face. Because she didn't like my attitude. And so I would fix my face. Or my dad, he would cut straight to it, right? He'd go, boy, go to your room till you learn how to act. Right? So I go into my room, I get my act together, I step out into the hallway, and I'd say, to be or not to be. I spent a lot of time in my room, I just want to say that. Right? But that's not what they were talking about in terms of attitude, and I didn't get it until I was 17. So I already told you that my dad was a pastor, and so on Sunday, we would go to church from 7:30 a.m. to 11:30 p.m. We stop at 3 o'clock for chicken, not because we're black, but because chicken is delicious. Right? Church all day. So Friday night, I'm 17. I go to my dad, I say, Dad, can I borrow the car? And what does my dad say? He says, yes, he loves me, right? So I get the keys, I get the car, I pick up my friends, we go cruising for girls. I don't know what would have happened had we found girls, but we're cruising. I fill the car up with gas, I come home before curfew, I hand my dad the keys, and what does he say about my attitude? Yeah, I got a great attitude, right? So I came home early, car's full of gas, great attitude. I say the same about my dad, right? Sunday, my best friend Dexter calls me up and says, Andre, can you pick me up for the movies? What do I know about Sunday? Church all day. But I'm 17. I'm invincible. And Jesus is my friend. So I go to my dad and I say, Dad, can I borrow the car? And what does my dad say? Not only does he say no, but he gives me the ultimate consequence. Going to hell. In my household, the ultimate consequence was you could either go to hell on your own or my dad would show you the way. As a result of that, I would say my dad had what kind of an attitude? A bad attitude. He would say the same thing about my attitude. So what is it that actually determines one's attitude? All right, let me back it up to your story, right? Anybody have a teenager in your life? All right. Anybody remember being a teenager in your life, right? So here's a scenario. You're at home, just kind of doing your home thing. Kid runs up. Mom, you look pretty good in those jeans. Been working out, right? And you know, mom is like, hey, wait a minute. You're buttering me up, right? And so then the kid says, I just got a call from Marcia. I got a text from Marcia. She's having a party. It starts in 10 minutes. Can you drop me off? And what does any reasonable parent say to that loving request? What is wrong with you? Who calls at the last minute and says there's a party? No, you can't go to that party. That's irresponsible. You got stuff to do. Your room's a mess. Your brothers and sisters have been fighting. And you got a C in gym class last semester. Who gets a C in gym class last semester? Right? So you unload on the kid, and what does the parent say? I mean, what does the kid do? Transformers. You never, I hate. And they storm off to their room, they close the door like they own the joint, right? And so the parent is like, oh, you know what? I just unloaded on this kid. I did some transference. It's too much. Let me go back and be a reasonable person. And, you know, Cindy's got this acne thing, and my kid is really supportive, so let me. So you go to the kid, knock on the door. Doom, 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 doom. What do you want? All right, this is the deal. You can go to Cindy's party, can't stay the whole time. I'll pick you up at this time. We got other stuff to do. Get your stuff. Let's go. What happens to the kid's attitude? It gets better, right? It may not be as pristine as it was previously, but it gets better. Why? Because they got what they wanted. And so when we see people with bad attitudes, we see people with hostility, when we see people who are somewhat disgruntled, before they tell us what their thing is, we already recognize that there's a goal that they're not reaching. And so our objective should be to analyze what that goal is and help them reach their goal. And if it's not something we can help them with, then we need to help them find a new goal. I can't do this because of these parameters or that. But what are some other things that we can do? What are some other things you can do, right? So there's that. So what are the goals of human beings? We are all looking for significance, belonging, and safety. Significance says that I'm a person with purpose and power. I was born for a reason. I was born to be able to do something. I have the ability to engage in something. Belonging says that I want to be in a community of people or a network of people who understand my significance. And lastly, safety. I want to be physically, mentally, spiritually, intellectually safe. To be in relationships with people who understand my significance. So we're all looking for significance, belonging, and safety. Why do kids join gangs? Probably one of those three or a combination of those three. Why do kids join 4-H? Same thing. What's the difference between the kids who are in the gang and the kids who are in 4-H? I would suggest that it is the methods of getting to these two things that are different. We are more alike than we're different. We're more alike than we're different. I would suggest that Christians are after this. safety, significance, and belonging. I would suggest that Muslims are after the safety, significance, and belonging. I would suggest that Buddhists are after the safety, significance, and belonging. But how we get there may be very different. And those become our obstacle illusions. Those become our obstacle illusions. So let's do a quick exercise, and then we'll get to having some more fun stuff. You will notice that we probably will not get through all of the handout, but just like my grandmother said, don't give away all your good stuff on the first date. All right? So there'll be more opportunities for us to interact with each other. So if you go down to page 2, and I'd like for you to ask yourself, what have the groups on the left taught you about groups across the top? In a very particular kind of way. I want you to put a plus if it was something positive, a positive conversation, a minus if it was a negative conversation, or a 0 if it was never anything we ever talked about. All right? Pluses, minuses, and zeros. So pluses if they were positive conversations, minuses if they were negative conversations, and zeros if they were never anything we talked about. All right? I'll give just a couple of minutes for that. All right, stop right where you are. What I'd like for you to do is to, right at your table, just take another 2 minutes and have conversations about your pluses, minuses, and zeros. Share what you want to share. Don't share what you don't want to share. So I'll give you 2 minutes starting now.
So I know you give enough time for people to have a thorough conversation about that activity, and or to even do the activity. But I hope that this is an assessment that you can take home for yourself and complete it. And
an opportunity to have conversations with your colleagues, both here and in other places. But as you were talking with folks, what were some themes that came up? What did you notice as you were having conversations? Yes?
One thing that occurred to me is if I look at my family, generationally it was different. Because my parents were very biased against most things, and the next generation isn't.
So time can have an impact on the exposure that people have, right? How people see the world or how they see individuals. Cool. Any other themes people saw? Yes?
Your race and gender affect how you see everything.
Your race and gender can affect how you see everything. And I would extend that to say that what other people think about your race and gender probably affects you more than how you see yourself, right? Yeah. Cool. One more. Yes.
I grew up in South Minneapolis, so very diverse from the time in the 60s and 70s. But I look back thinking, oh my gosh, what a little microcosm of, I don't know, some of Bobby Sherman, where we always had those messages of for all these people.
Yeah.
And I am first generation German. So for me, it's a funny story because my first language was not English. And my street at that time had 5 languages, Ukraine, Czech, you know. So I am funny, I'm in the middle, I identify, I clearly am white. But I also, we forget that, you know, we don't know our stories of other people, but that attitude related.
Yeah.
So I identify with being different, and, you know, there was no talking in my family, so as a kid, I think it was great, because I didn't have all these things
Yeah.
told to me, and so you grow up with a big, open view,
And I think it's also important that we take what we've. So first of all, my parents did the best they could with what they had, and everything they gave me would have been inadequate for the challenges I had to face. They gave me the best of what they had. They could not have ever taught me about sexting. You know, using to have intimate relationships with your phone kind of thing, right? They could have never taught me about that. Why? It didn't exist. It was not within their context, so they couldn't share that. So first and foremost, I want to say when we look at these pluses, these minuses, and zeros, cut the people around you a break, right? Give them some slack, because they may not have had the wherewithal to be or put you in positions to have the kind of interactions that we think are necessary today. So cut them some slack. Simultaneously, those things may not have been our fault. What we didn't know, who we weren't around, may not have been our fault. But now that we're in a metropolitan kind of world, or you know, some people might say progressive, whatever, that we're in this world that we recognize that differences and commonalities are important. Although those things were not our fault, they are now our responsibility, right? And so how do we take responsibility for that? Through cognition, thinking about our thinking. So if we turn over to page 3, we have to take cognitive control, right? And so there are a couple of ways to talk about that or think about that, and there's impact and intent, and you can read kind of the differences between those two things that may be a bit confusing, but you know when someone has negatively impacted you, and they've had good intentions. You also know when you've been negatively impacted by someone and they've had bad intentions, right? And you also know that there have been people who had good intentions with bad impact, right? So you can work through that. But the thing that I want to point out here in this particular exercise is the car, right? And so do cars have blind spots? Yes. And if you could, on your paper, just draw an X where you think those blind spots are. So just go ahead and do that as a matter of exercise, right? So no matter what car you drive, whether it's your car, or you borrow a car, or you rent a car, all those cars have blind spots. And those blind spots are not your fault, but they are your what?
responsibility, right? So what you don't know about another group isn't your fault, but it is your responsibility once you know that you don't know that to actually try to close that educational gap. If you turn over to page 4, just want to talk about these 5 stages. All too often, we get stuck at stage 3, which is this idea of tolerance. So that is the highest acumen of human potential. Like, we have arrived when we are being tolerant. But I would suggest that there's much more to our building relationships than just tolerance. Tolerance is about 50%. You get a 50% chance of success. And I would suggest that if we look at acceptance and appreciation in terms of what our customers would say to us, if we just tolerated them, what kind of rating would they give our medical institution? If we actually gave them 4s and 5s, how would they return with 4s and 5s? And I think you can answer that question for yourself. Lastly, is this on page 5, is this concept of context and culture. As context changes, so does culture. Culture is a response directly to context. And lastly is, on page 7, is this idea of cognitive behavior therapy. And this simply is recognizing that our behaviors are a combination of our thoughts and our feelings. And we can manipulate, we can take control of our thoughts and our feelings as we move forward. We know that bigotry is an emotional state. It's an emotion. And how do you counteract or change an emotion? How do you change an emotion? Acceptance. Typically, we have a stronger emotion, right? We have a stronger emotion. And so, anyone had a friend that was sad? The blues, right? I'm not talking about clinical depression. I'm just talking about the blues, right? What do you do with that friend? You sit with that friend. You listen to that friend. You take them cookies. You take them out. You make tea for them, right? You show them this professional term called allophilia, which is positive regard or love. You love a bigot if you want to change a bigot. It is a slow, long process. Right? Many of you may have someone in your family that you may put into this category of not being politically correct or having whatnot. But if they don't hang around you, if you don't connect with them, do they get better? No, they don't. They don't. We know that prejudice is a frozen thought process, that it is not thinking. You have limited information, you stick to that no matter what other kinds of things come towards you. And so how do you change thinking? You ask Socratic questions. Ask Socratic questions. So when you encounter someone who's bigoted, prejudiced, you ask them questions, and their world starts to kind of crumble if they don't have answers to those questions. And lastly, discrimination is a set of behaviors. And we have laws that say you can or cannot act in these kinds of ways. But there are no laws that talk about what people can think or how they can feel. So whose responsibility is it to help people think and feel differently? It is ours. It is ours. And then lastly, on page 8, at the back of page 8, are some things that you can do. And I am of the mindset that it is important to put your mask on first before you help someone else. So if I'm not proud of my own history, if I don't know my own history, if I can't give an answer for what my ancestors did or did not do, if I don't know, that is not my fault, but it is my responsibility. My name is Andre Koen. I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. It is 9:30, right? Oh, we go to 10? Yeah. Oh, why did I have 9:30 on here? Oh, no, No, okay, good. So now we can get to the good stuff. All right, good. I don't know if you can see, I'm like sweating bullets. I was like, I got to get through all of this stuff in the next 5 minutes. Okay, cool. All right, good. So let's slow down just for a second. So can you pass out those cards? That'd be great.
Would you be so kind as to
I can do
pass
that
this?
side. I can do that side.
Oh, okay. Well, you do this front part, and I'll come back here. No, I wrote 9:30 on my notes. I was like, what is going on? Okay, good.
I'm like, wow, I didn't get on my day because I'm up next.
There's
There's probably enough for everybody's stuff.
all right. So do most people have one? All right, good. Whew. So on that card, there is, on the top is A, B, C, and on the bottom is 1, 2, 3. And what is that a picture of at letter A? It's a vulture eating something, okay? Or a stork with a baby. It is also what? A man in a boat, an island, and 2 trees. Did everyone over there? Okay. I don't. So at letter A, it is a tree, and it's a bird with something in its mouth. It is also an island with 2 trees, and a fish and a person in the boat. The question here is, before you saw the second image, whichever one you saw first, before you saw the second image, was it there before you saw it? So is it possible that when we talk about this idea of race, or we talk about ethnicity, is it possible that there are some things that are existent with those so-called other groups that we miss because A, we're either not looking for it, or we're not able to see those commonalities that we have, right? So right at letter B is the picture of, it is the word liar, and it is also a face. It is the word liar and the face. Now, I don't know about you, but for me, I can only see one of those at a time. So when I see the face, I can't see the word liar. And when I see the word liar, I can't see the face. So what that suggests to me is that through my cognition, what I lock onto is what I see, which suggests that I don't see the world as it is, I see the world as I am. I see the world as I am, not as it is. And so if I lock on to positive things about an individual, guess what I'll see? I'll see positive things. If I lock on to negative things about individuals, I'll see negative things. If I lock on to negative things about myself, I will only see those negative things about myself. But I can also lock on to the beautiful things about myself. right? So there was, I love the Dove commercials. They have some problems, but I love the Dove commercials. There's one where they had people sit in front of a forensic artist. I don't know if anybody's seen that one. You can look this up. But they had people sit in front of a forensic artist, and the artist couldn't see them. So they asked the artist to draw portraits of people who they were talking to, right? And so they had people describe themselves to this forensic artist and draw their picture. And then they had like a little social hour with folks, and people got to mingle and that kind of stuff. And then they picked people from the group to describe the first person that did the self-portrait, right? So the forensic scientist did the self-portrait of this individual. And so they had another person describe this person to the forensic artist, and he drew a picture of that. And so they put the two pictures side by side, and the thing that was most compelling was that the people who described themselves to the forensic artist, their pictures were less them than the pictures that other people saw of them, right? And so I caution you to be kind to yourself, to be kind to yourself, that you are more powerful, more brilliant than you may even know, but other people may know that in ways that are beneficial to you, right? So we already did letter C, which was that triangle. So this is something you can share with your friends and colleagues and family members and whatnot. We'll skip number 1 just because it takes more time than I want to give it, and go straight to number 2. So if you can just do number 2. So when my wife read this, she was like, "Man, you got a lot of typos." So what's the lesson in number 2? What's that?
Your mind corrects what's missing.
Your mind corrects what's missing? You were just saying something, sir.
You can still read it.
You can still read it, right? So we make sense of things even when they don't necessarily make sense. We can make sense of things. One of the things that, so I was just doing a session with a vision loss center, and we were talking about diabetes in African Americans and how that relates to health, right? And so people brought up food and diabetes specifically. And so we were talking about diabetes, and someone had a question about soul food. Has anyone ever heard of that, soul food? Right? And so typically it's referred to as being kind of an African American or even Southern kind of delicacy sense of food. And I laughed because I am of the belief that soul food kind of stuff is not cultural. I think it's become cultural, but I don't think originally it was cultural. And so I point to, so my wife is Assiniboine, which is a tribe out of Montana, and Assiniboine Sioux, or Nakota, with an N. And so we were joking about fry bread, right? Is anybody familiar with fry bread, had fry bread, know somebody about fry bread, right? And so we have friends and extended family members who aren't as, culturally aware as we are, and so they oftentimes ask us for fry bread for special occasions and that kind of stuff. And my wife doesn't mind making it and that kind of thing, but they always call it, that Indian bread. Can we get that Indian bread? And we laugh because we know what fried bread really is, and so it's been associated with being American Indian or Native American, however folks want to call themselves, when in fact it was a result of the commodities that the federal government was giving. And so being able to make a flat bread was a result of commodities. So if you look in ancient times of indigenous peoples, you don't see Indian tacos, right? So that's a relatively modern invention. And the same with
with African Americans during slave time. They did not get the choicest meat or the choicest vegetables. So they added fat and lard and all these things to it. And what do we know about African Americans and Native Americans and diabetes? High, right? And so it's based on these things. That is a contributing factor. There are other contributing factors. But sometimes we get confused about those things. So it's important to recognize. And so people have made a life out of things that, out of situations that didn't make sense, right? And so we have that ability as human beings. And then number 3. So does anyone see a shape that looks like a house? Okay. Does anyone see a shape that looks like a hat? All right. Does anyone see an arrow? All right, cool. Does anyone see something that looks like a finger pointing? You know, you're number 1, right? Cool. What in number 3 can actually give you concrete information, real information? The arrow, okay. All right, some people, okay, so what you should be looking for